Hello, hello, and welcome once again to another edition of Quoth the Raven, Lewis Bright Raven. I'm your host, Lewis Bright Raven. It is Friday, October 21st, Friday night movie night, and our discussion topic this week is NOSFERATU times 2, that is the 1922 version, original silent film by F.M. Burnell, and then the 1979 Werner Herzog edition. My guests, co-hosts this week are John Norris and MonsterFan.
Hey everyone.
Hello all.
And North Free is in the house. How do everyone? Cheers to one of the greatest films in silent films. Yes, it is one of the greatest films. It's also one of the most influential for monster films, actually, for its era. Pop culture's in the house as well. All righty. So, why we selected this film was partly because it's Halloween time and everything. And I figured, what the heck? I've got a NOSFERATU shirt. I might as well wear it and have something to relate it to. Also, John hadn't seen it before.
I know, shocking.
It is, because you're the classic films guy.
Yeah, I am, but I still have a lot to learn. So,
It's a broad area.
Yeah.
So, which is one reason I'm glad to do these, because sometimes it gets me to watch movies that I've been meaning to watch, but have never gotten around to watching before, and this was one of them.
Well, I think partly it's because horror is not really your genre.
Yeah, like it's not that it's like I really have to be in the mood to watch horror, and it's not my go-to.
Yeah.
But I have opened up a little bit.
Oh yeah, you have. Well, you tend to like more. I don't know. I won't say yes psychological, but more like the Vincent Price type films. More so than the monsters, shall we say? But that's okay. We got you in there. We got you watching stuff. So
yes,
let's start with the first film from 1922, NOSFERATU, directed by F.W. Burnell, screenplay by Henrik Galeen, story by Henrik Galeen, based off of Bram Stoker's Dracula, produced by Enrico Diekman and Albin Grau, starring Max Schreck, Greta Schroeder, Gustav von Wagenheim, Alexander Granach, Ruth Landshoff, and Wolfgang Heitz. Production company Prana Film, distributed by Film Arts Guild. There's two versions that have survived. One is an hour and 3 minutes. There's one that's an hour and 29 minutes. We watched the 1 hour and 29 minute version, which had a different musical score than the other one. And it was released originally on March 4th, 1922. It is a silent film.
And that means it is 100 years old this year.
Yes. Who wants to talk about what it's about? Who wants to read it?
I'll do it.
Okay.
So, in short, this is a remake of Bram Stoker's Dracula with slight changes to make it more Germanic/Slavic in nature. In 1838, in the fictional German town of Visborg, Thomas Hutter, played by Gustav von Wangenheim, is sent to Transylvania by his employers, estate agent Herr Nock, played by Alexander Granach, to visit a new client named Count Orlok, played by the inimitable Max Schreck, who plans to buy a house across from Hutter's own home. Unbeknownst to Hutter, Nock is under the thrall of Orlok and is setting him up. Hutter bids farewell to his new bride Ellen, played by Greta Schroeder, and places her in the care of friends as he must travel from Germany to Transylvania. While embarking on his journey, Hutter stops at an inn where the locals become frightened by the mere mention of Orlok's name. They try to warn him off of visiting the Count, but Hutter scoffs at their superstition. Hutter rides on a coach to a castle the next day where he is welcomed by Count Orlok. When Hutter is eating dinner and accidentally cuts his thumb, Orlok tries to suck the blood out, but his repulsed guest pulls his hand away. Hutter wakes up the morning after to find fresh punctures on each side of his neck, which he attributes to mosquitoes. That night, Orlok signs the documents to purchase the house and notices a photo of Hutter's wife, Ellen, remarking that she has a lovely neck. Reading a book about vampires that he took from the local inn, Hutter starts to suspect that Orlok is a vampire. He cowers in his room as midnight approaches with no way to bar the door. The door opens by itself and Orlok enters, and Hutter hides under the bed covers and falls unconscious. At the same time, back in Visburg, Germany, Ellen awakens from her sleep and in a trance walks onto her balcony's railing, which gets their friend Harding's attention. He goes to get Ellen off the railing when she collapses into him. When the doctor arrives, she shouts Hutter's name, apparently able to see Orlok in his castle attacking him. The next day, Hutter explores the castle, finding the coffin in which Orlok is resting dormant in the crypt. For whatever reason, he is too afraid to either attempt to kill the vampire or flee the castle, either one, while Orlok is dormant. Hours later, Orlok piles up coffins on a couch and climbs into the last one.
Couch.
Coach.
Oh, coach, sorry. Take two. Hours later, Orlok piles up coffins on a coach and climbs into the last one before the coach departs, and Hutter then decides to try to leave his room and try to get home. Only somehow he's locked in, we're never shown this, so he has to climb out of the window using torn bed sheets as a makeshift rope, and when he escapes, he wears himself out too much and falls unconscious. Meanwhile, the coffins are taken aboard a schooner that looks like it's sailing the ocean, only if it's sailing the oceans, it would basically be a ridiculously long journey, whereas they could take the Danube River and get there in a fraction of the time. But does the Danube look anything like what was filmed? We'll discuss this more later in what we think. Anyway,
sorry, it was something that bothered me.
All of the ship's sailors and captain die, and Orlok takes control. When the ship arrives in Visburg, Orlok leaves unobserved, carrying one of his coffins, and moves into the house he purchased. Many deaths in the town follow after Orlok's arrival, which the town's doctors blame on an unspecified plague. Hutter eventually makes it back to town and to Ellen, seemingly before Orlok is ready to pursue her, but she is having visions and knows he's nearby, almost like a psychic sense of him. Meanwhile, Herzog has escaped the local asylum and he is pursued by the town as the cause of the recent plague deaths, which doesn't make sense as he was in custody in the asylum before the plague started. Oops!
Go ahead.
Anyway, he basically makes for a short-term distraction to allow Orlok to move relatively unnoticed, but Ellen, reading the mysterious book that her husband brought back about vampires, has sussed the situation out and realized that only a woman without sin giving her blood freely to the Count will trick him long enough to be killed. She feels the Count's presence and decides to bait herself by telling Hutter to go get another doctor and allows Orlok to enter her room and drain her. But sure enough, her pure blood is more than enough to keep him preoccupied, feeding upon her to realize that the sun is coming up, and before he can escape, he is disintegrated into ash. Hutter and the doctor arrive, and Ellen gets to say goodbye as she dies from exsanguination. The end.
Okay. Quite a bit of craziness in that one. Like I said, there's some storyline issues I had with the whole travel. Basically, what they're trying to say is they go from Transylvania, from the Baltic to the Mediterranean, all the way around the Atlantic and up to the north to get to Visburg, which is a fictional town. But they all addressed this in the 79 film, and we'll discuss that more. But it made me go, how does Hutter get back in time to stop him if he has to go all the way around, because that would take months? And the answer, of course, is the Danube, because you can go from a straight shot on the Danube River from Transylvania up to the northern part of Germany. Mm-hmm. And that's why I was like, I always thought that they would show that, but they didn't in this film, and it made it a little bit confusing on the timeline of what was taking place. Let's see. North Free says, the remark from Orlok about a lovely neck gets me every time. Glad they kept it in the cinema. Yep. Orlok is one of the most terrifying looking vampires of all moviedom. Yeah. Along with, is that Radu or Radu from Subspecies? I don't know how it's pronounced. Do you know, MonsterFan?
I think it's Radu.
Radu? Okay. Was the dream reciprocal? I don't know. Yeah, and something interesting about this isn't just how Max Schreck looks in this film, which, by the way, the makeup on him for this film is amazing. Mm-hmm. But the reason it's called Count Orlok and all these other character names are changed is because Bram Stoker's widow sued them over the adaptation because they didn't get permission to use the story, and the court ruled that all the copies of the film were to be destroyed. Somehow a handful of copies survived, and that's how we still have it 100 years later. But it actually didn't get into American audiences until, I believe it was the 1960s. Was when it actually came to America, because they got shut down from the lawsuit. It's very interesting, though, because there's different things that go on with this film of what Renault is trying to do. Keep in mind, this is 1922. This is in the interim between World War I and World War II Germany. And even though everybody thinks the Nazi Third Reich just came up overnight, popped up, it didn't. It was there really from before World War I and was slowly growing in power in their society. The plague of the rats and stuff like that was really a metaphor for dehumanization, and the Count was supposed to be associated allegedly with both the Jewish and homosexual communities as anti-Semitic and anti-gay sentiment. Hence while the Aryan race was going on and growing power in Germany at that time. The director, F.W. Murnau, happened to be a homosexual male and was a friend to many Jews in the German film community at the time. And that's what he was trying to play up in a lot of the thematic structure of this film. The other thing that was kind of weird is how odd some of these actors looked in the film, not just Schreck as Count Orlok, but we'll get into that in a moment. However, because of some of the negative sentiment in the times, the production company of the film went bankrupt and shut down almost immediately after the release of this movie. Now, part of that was due to the court costs from the lawsuit from the Stoker estate, but also there was actual fines and penalties from the state that bankrupted the whole production company as well. Okay. Did any of you else find anything like that information about this that you want to share?
Well, you mentioned that little bit about the music, and what I found, because me being a musician, I have to look up The original score was written by Hans Erdmann, and I don't know of anything he didn't write many scores, but so he wrote the original score, and this being the era of silent film, it was performed live with an orchestra when it premiered in Berlin. But most of his score was lost,
Right.
And so, at least what I read, apparently what happened was, on subsequent reissues of the film, is that different composers and musicians would either write or improvise their own stuff. And so what we have now is kind of a mixture of the little bit of score that still remains, plus pieces of cues that other people have written.
Yeah, what I read was they were trying to identify from what was left of the pieces of the score. Okay, well, if it went from point A to point B, what fits? What logically fits? They were trying to recreate the score from what was left. But like you say, there were so many different people doing it that it became kind of a hodgepodge of sorts. And that's even just for the original 1922 version. The 79 version has a little bit even more modern take on the music than what was done for the original. North 3 says Orlok was a true monster. He just left a path of destruction across the globe. And he just forced himself on men and women alike. Just a predator, a true monster. I don't know about that. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the 79 version. Kinski doesn't see him that way, actually, the actor who portrayed him. But let's talk about what I thought.
Before we do that, can I get in a word?
Absolutely.
So a couple things occurred to me. One, this film was written and produced by practicing occultists.
Yes.
If you look at the shots of Granach's knock holding the letter from Orlok, and those shots are reproduced as stills in David Shaw's book about Dracula, Dracula's movie heritage. You will see magical squares, astrological symbols, things that would be familiar to ceremonial magicians of the 20th century. And those who are interested in ceremonial magic could tell you a lot more about this. But that's just one thing that occurred to me. And that's why they were named Prana films. They actually only existed to do this movie originally. And Prana, is a Hindu or an Eastern word for the breath of life. And it was a very important occult term even to this day. So that's one thing. Another thing is I agree with you about the traveling. It really doesn't make sense. You see Ellen sitting out on the ocean, sitting out on the seashore, waiting for the ship to come in. But where's it coming from? It is one of the negatives of this. Another negative to me would be Ellen herself. She's a very manly-looking German woman, and not at all attractive in my mind. I don't know why Orlok would have been like, hot diggity dog. Let's go get her blood.
But here's what's funny: in the Orlok version, there are no brides of Dracula.
Right.
So
that's a good point.
Maybe that's why he's like, hey, it's female. I don't care. It's female.
I suppose. And then the other thing, I think this film is a masterpiece, and I make that very clear. I would say, to me, from a weakness, having studied the novel, having studied most of the available classical films based on Dracula,
Mhm.
I would say that an area that is really weak in this film, and it's kind of surprising considering the people who made the film, is the character that was supposed to be Van Helsing
Yeah.
plays a very minor role. I mean, most of the things he says are ludicrous, and
Mhm.
he's not put forward as a man of wisdom and scholarship like he is in
In the book.
most of the mainstream Dracula movies.
Right. I think.
And
Yeah. Go ahead.
and he's called in this movie. I can't even remember his name in the movie, but a Paracelsian, and
Mhm.
that's a doctor whose bases his principles on the work of the great alchemist and medical doctor Paracelsus. There's nothing wrong with that. There are still Paracelsian doctors in the world today,
Mhm.
but they didn't do anything with it. They made him kind of look like a joke who was sleeping at the end of the movie and had to get awakened by Hutter. And so I found that to be very disappointing. Most of the interesting stuff about vampires and Dracula are told to us through Van Helsing. He's the scholar.
Mhm.
And in this movie, it's mostly done through looking in an old book.
Mhm.
He doesn't really say anything about vampires. In fact, at one place or two places, he poo-poos the idea.
Yeah.
So he's not the Van Helsing that we. I kind of thought that kind of an odd approach.
I think that had to do again with you mentioned the magicians, and stuff. I think that's why the scholarly side of Van Helsing was diminished. Because if you go with the science of Van Helsing, but you're playing up the Paracelsus stuff, they conflict in a way. And so if you're going to do what Murnau and his other producers and people in their group believe with their religious side, I think they just wanted to diminish Van Helsing as a character. And also, I think they knew that they were kind of cutting it close with how close they were basically ripping off Stoker without permission. So if they changed all the names of the key and removed one of the key elements of narration, which was Van Helsing, would it be different enough? I think that's part of why they did that. But yeah, that's an absolutely accurate observation on their part. So I agree with that. There were other things like Orlok claimed to have servants at the castle, but they're never seen. In fact, everything you see is Orlok doing everything himself. He's the one who was actually driving the coach when he meets and takes him to the castle at the pass. You don't ever see anybody serving the food. It's very interesting. I thought that was bad decision making because it also would have explained later why Hutter couldn't escape the castle because there's other people that are keeping him there. Possibly, but I felt that once Hutter saw Orlok in the crypt, he could have killed him, but they didn't really explain why he didn't. They could have very easily have done that. I know they did in the novel for Dracula because Harker had been bitten. He was already enthralled and unable to. He was mentally, prevented. They never really explained that. Again, they didn't have the brides, which only makes sense because this version of Dracula, Orlok, does not make new vampires. He only kills, which takes away the dark sexuality of the character that later became famous with the Dracula version. And it also cuts the connection to explain why Ellen's picking up on his presence when she is supposedly without sin, which is another thing that bothered me. We've already talked about the traveling of the ship situation. Like I said, he'd have to go all the way around, and that would take about 4 months' journey. at least to do it, and it just didn't. The way they edited it and cut the time didn't make sense. But you could do the Danube River within 2 to 6 weeks. Yeah, compared to 4 months. So it was kind of weird. Am I the only one who didn't like Ellen as a woman without sin?
Yeah, I don't know how that's possible.
Yes.
I mean,
women are sin as far as I'm concerned. So
yeah, I mean, if she's without, I'm assuming woman without sin means virgin. Is what I'm assuming.
Well, they're married. I don't see how that makes sense.
Yeah, but they're newly married. Could they have been possibly not have consummated, and at that point?
I didn't get that sense from it, but maybe
I didn't either. That's why I'm saying that was a weird twist. They needed to identify that, because it would have been easier if they were newlyweds who hadn't yet consummated, and Hernock says, "Well, I know you just got married, and you were going to go on your honeymoon or whatever, but we really need this, deal done. When you get back, you have an extra bonus. You can take her somewhere special." That would have made more sense. Now, granted, this is a silent film, so it'd be a little bit more difficult to explain that, but I think it would have made sense in the later film. I don't know. It was something that kind of got lost, I thought, a little bit.
It might have been one of those attempts at differentiation from the original novel source.
Yeah.
But you're right. It does. That's another thing that's really kind of left up in the air.
Mm-hmm. Other story elements that annoyed me. Why was Knock put into the asylum in the first place? They never really showed why that I can remember. They do in the 79 film, but not in the 22 film. And wouldn't it have made more sense for him to escape and then help Orlok get to the house instead of Orlok running around carrying his coffin, as Northfree mentions? It's kind of funny. He's running around and nobody notices this guy running around with a coffin under his arm. I would have thought that would have made more sense, that he would have helped Orlok, because he was basically Orlok's enslaved helper there. And who found Hutter passed out on the grounds after he escaped the castle and took him to the medical facility to be treated? They never showed that, explained that that I can remember in the first film. So there's a lot of things that kind of knocked.
As I understand it, from what I've studied of this film, there are scholars think that there are still some pieces missing. That this is the best. This is the best we've got, and maybe the best we'll ever have. But there are some holes in the plot that are not addressed, and that's one of them. And so maybe there was originally film that did that, but it's missing.
Yeah, that could be. That could be. And then we have to stop and think this is a film from 1922. It's not like these are exactly deep thinking films when we were doing the silent films, because you didn't have the ability to evocate and really talk about those subtexts in a silent film. So as long as the film holds fairly true to the source material, which is of course the Stoker novel, I think it does that. Obviously the courts did. They decided it was infringement after all. Right? The thing is, all these people look weird in this film. They don't look normal. Do you guys know what Shrek looks like without the makeup?
I have seen a picture.
I've seen a picture.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and show everybody what Shrek looks like here without the makeup real quick. Of course, they did the prosthetic for the ears, nose, and the skull cap, which for 1922 was amazing. There's Northfree's comment about he's just walking through town with a coffin under his arms, nobody to see him. North says, I love how they have Orlok move slowly and purposefully, so rigid. It conveys power. He doesn't need to waste energy on sudden movements. He knows he'll get you in the end. Well,
Sort of like a spider.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. But I think it's also he exhibits a sort of he emanates a sort of ability to make people unable to fight back or run away. Either one, they're just so terrified by his presence that they just stand there and take it. Also, Orlok's infamous rise from the ground move, rise from the ground meaning out of the crypt, yeah, which later influences the Undertaker. Okay, yeah. Pop Culture asks, do any original posters or memorabilia still exist from Nosferatu? This poster is actually one of the original. It's reduxed digitally, but this is what one of the original posters from 22 looked like for this film.
Yeah, that's and that picture's one of the strongest scenes in the movie. The scenes on the ship, in my opinion, are very strong.
Yeah, so there's that. But then, like I said, all the cast look kind of weird, particularly the men. Alexander Granich looks just as creepy looking as Shrek. He could have played Nosferatu just looking like that. When you think about it.
Yeah, well, I think because he's supposed to be an insane person, they made him look insane.
Yeah. And then Max Nemitz, who plays the ship's captain, looks like a damn werewolf. I mean, when you think about it, he does. The way the whole beard comes out and down and everything. I mean, all they do is like maybe darken his skin up a little bit to make it a little more rusty looking. He would look like a werewolf. I just thought it was funny. I thought all the characters, even Hutter himself, looks kind of creepy to me. There's really nobody normal looking in this film to me. I don't know. Is it? Am I the only one who feels that way? Or
I think some of the minor characters are pretty normal looking, but the major characters do all seem, in my opinion, to have something odd about their appearance. I agree with you. I think Hutter is kind of effeminate looking.
Mhm.
I mean, there are a couple of scenes when he's throwing himself on the bed and literally hiding under the covers. I mean,
here's the funny part. When I see Hutter, I think Tom Cruise's Lestat. The whole effeminate side of that character, I think that he picked that up off of this movie.
Yeah, that could be.
Because that's not Lestat in the book,
right.
if you know what I mean. Lestat in the book is a lot darker, a lot more menacing than the one in the Tom Cruise film. So I was just thinking that when I was looking at this, I was like, yeah, that's where you got that from. I think it's a bit of an overrated film, but it is a classic. I enjoyed it for what it is. I gave it 3 out of 5. What did you guys give it?
Well, okay, I got something to say about this movie. So that not only was this the first time I've seen this movie, watching this movie, and I watched it Tuesday, was the first time I've ever watched a silent feature film all the way through. And watching a silent film is an experience unto itself. And it reminded me of the scene in Billy Wilder's Sunset Boulevard where Norma Desmond is screening the silent film for Joe Gillis in her house, and she looks and she says, "We didn't need dialogue. We had faces." And when I saw Max Schreck in this movie, as like, yeah, Norma Desmond's got a point, um, for me, this is a movie whose positives far outweigh its negatives, because there are images in this movie that are so beautifully composed, Orlok rising up out of the grave, or my favorite one is when Orlok approaches, was it Ellen's room, and all you see is his shadow.
The shadow creeping up the
And
stairwell. Yeah.
it's so beautifully done.
Yeah, the filmography is beautiful in this film. Absolutely.
Yes, and plus, a lot of this film was shot on location, which, as I understand, was not a common thing to do. And so even if they take the long way around traveling, the film has some great scenery to show for it, which may have been.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Max Schreck is absolutely unforgettable, and it's there's a shot where it's like he turns his face around, and it almost feels like his eyes go first, and then as the rest of his head turns around. But it's like when you and what's even more remarkable about it is, and I read this, I think, on IMDb, so who knows if it's exactly true or not. But he makes his first appearance about 20 to 21 minutes into the film, and then he's actually not on screen for as long of a time as you would think, the title character of a movie. But Max Schreck utterly dominates that movie, and when you see his performance, you can believe, the notion that there were rumors spreading around that people actually thought that Max Schreck was a vampire.
Okay, so will you give this what rating?
4 stars.
4 stars. Okay.
And, I watched this Tuesday night, and Count Orlok has been living rent-free in my head ever since.
Oh, that's great. I'm sure he would approve.
Now, if he's been living rent-free in your head since Tuesday, and here we are on Friday, you can't give him a 4. You got to give him at least 4 or 5.
Okay.
At least
4.5.
Okay.
I just wanted to add to what John said. In the Kino Blu-ray disc, there is a video essay of the locations that were used in the movie, and they go to their present day view of them. And it's John, it's something you might want to look up. It's really interesting to see how much of those buildings and stuff still remain to this day, even after the Second World War. Yeah. So it's really interesting. And as you say, it was very rare at the time to go out into the field and actually film on location.
Right. Yeah. North 3's having a fit. North 3 saying 5 out of 5. Anything less than 5 is true blasphemy. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I understand where North is coming from in terms of it being an all-time classic and everything. I just, as much as I truly do appreciate Shrek's performance and I love the makeup on him and everything, I cannot get past all the plot holes in that film. I just can't, because the plot holes weren't there in the source material.
You just don't like fantasy films, and that's fine. I mean,
no, I just,
you give every fantasy film we watch a 3 or less. So and that's fine. That's your prerogative. But no, I think this is a 5 out of 5 film. I agree with North 3. Okay. It is a desert island horror disc. If you're ever trapped on a desert island, and it is one of the true classics of world cinema, not just horror cinema.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
It is not perfect, and I agree with some of your criticisms, but some of them may be plot holes due to damaging or missing film. Some of them may just be they were trying to avoid getting sued by the Stoker's estate. I don't know. And some of them may just be bad writing. I don't know.
Yeah,
but I think it's very difficult.
Probably all of the above. To be fair.
Another thing I will say, and this probably doesn't apply since everyone in the chat room seems to have seen this film, but it's like when it comes to there are two things I say when it comes to classic film. Don't let black and white turn you off, and now I would say don't let the absence of audible dialogue turn you off, because once you get into this film and you let it take you on its journey, you won't even notice the lack of audible dialogue.
That's fair. Okay, let's go ahead and go on to the next one, the 79 remake of this film, NOSFERATU the Vampire, written and directed by Werner Herzog, based off of Bram Stoker's Dracula and the screen story of Nosferatu by F.W. Murnau, produced by Werner Herzog and Michael Ruskoff, starring Klaus Kinski, Isabelle Adjani, Bruno Ganz, Roland Topor, and Walter Landingast. Production companies: Werner Herzog Film Production, Gaumont and Zwetes, Duches Furnishing. I pronounced that correct. Distributed by 20th Century Fox and Gaumont. The release date in the U.S. was October 1st, 1979. With an hour and 47-minute runtime, it had a budget of $1.4 million in U.S. dollars at that time, and had a box office of $11.3 million internationally. That's worldwide. So it did very well financially, given what the budget was. For all intents and purposes, this is a remake of the 22 film. Only because the widow of Bram Stoker passed away, the rights of the Dracula franchise went into public domain, which allowed for the original characters to be named. So instead of Count Orlok, it's Dracula as the Nosferatu, Jonathan and Lucy Harker instead of Thomas and Ellen Hutter, etc. The details of the story and places are more accurate to the novel, which makes much of the story issues that I had with the 1922 film disappear, which, of course, accounting for what MonsterFan says, there could also be other reasons why those flaws were there in the film, with part of the film maybe not being there because it didn't survive or whatever. And also the factual real locations from the original Dracula story are more accurate to the original work. Jonathan Harker is a real estate agent in Wismar, Germany. His employer, Renfield, informs him that a nobleman named Count Dracula wishes to buy a property in Wismar and assigns Harker to visit the Count and complete the lucrative deal. Leaving his young wife Lucy behind in Wismar, he travels to Transylvania to Count Dracula's castle in a journey that lasts 4 weeks, carrying with him the deeds and documents needed to sell the house to the Count. On his trip, Harker stops at a village inn where the locals plead for him to stay away from the accursed castle, providing him with details of Dracula's vampirism. Ignoring their pleas of superstition, he continues on his journey, ascending to Borgo Pass on foot, and eventually arriving at Dracula's castle, where he meets the Count, a strange, almost rodent-like man with large ears, pale skin, sharp teeth, and long fingernails. The Count becomes enchanted by a small locket of portrait of Lucy and immediately agrees to purchase the Wismar property, particularly with the knowledge that he and Lucy would become neighbors. Again, no sign of the brides of Dracula. I'm kind of wondering, were the brides added later on in the Bela Lugosi version as an add-on at this point, or was that novel?
I thought they were in the novel.
I thought they were too. That's why I'm very surprised that they aren't in either one of these films. But anyway, as Jonathan's visit progresses, he is haunted at night by several dreamlike encounters with the vampiric Count, which of course is Dracula actually feeding off of him. Simultaneously, in Wismar, Lucy is tormented by night terrors and plagued by images of impending doom and her husband being in danger. Additionally, Renfield is committed to an asylum after biting a cow. Um, they actually show why he was arrested, which they didn't in the 1922 film. Apparently having gone completely insane. Of course, back at the castle, to Harker's horror, he finds the Count asleep in the coffin, confirming him that Dracula is indeed a vampire. And that night, Dracula reaches Wismar, taking the coffins filled with the cursed earth that he needs for his vampiric rest. Harker finds that he's imprisoned in the castle and attempts to escape through a window, making a makeshift rope fashioned from bed sheets. The rope is not long enough, and Jonathan falls, severely injuring himself. The next morning, he awakes on the ground, stirred by the sound of a young Romani boy playing the violin. The kid comes to him, and they is sent eventually to the hospital, where he raves about the black coffins to the doctors, who assume that he's just ill in the mind, or he got a head injury when he fell, or whatever. While we did see in the 22 film that he did fall from the bedsheet rope and done, it's like in this film they took that scene and expanded upon it to explain it more. I think in this film for that. Anyway, meanwhile, Dracula and his coffins travel to Wismar via ship, via the Black Sea port of Varna, through the Bosphorus and Strait of Gibraltar, and around the entire West European Atlantic coast to the Baltic Sea. Again, another 4-week journey, during which we know that Harker is in the medical facility in Germany getting treatment. He systematically kills the whole crew, making it appear as though they were afflicted with the plague. The ghost ship arrives with its cargo at Wismar, where doctors, including Abraham Van Helsing, investigate the strange fate of the vessel. They discover a ship's log that mentions their perceived affliction with the plague. Wismar is then flooded with rats from the ship. Dracula arrives in Wismar with his coffins, and death spreads rapidly throughout the town. The desperately ill Jonathan finally gets himself transported home, but he does not appear to recognize his wife when he finally arrives, and that's because he's under the thrall of Dracula, basically. Lucy later encounters Count Dracula. Weary and unable to die, he demands some of the love that she gave so freely to Jonathan, but she refuses, much to Dracula's dismay. Now aware that something other than the plague is responsible for the death that has beset her once peaceful town, Lucy desperately tries to convince the townspeople that Dracula is the cause of all this, but they are skeptical and uninterested in her pleas. From a book that given to Jonathan by the people in Transylvania, she finds that she can defeat Dracula's evil by distracting him until dawn, at which time the rays of the sun will destroy him, but only at the cost of her own life. That night, she lures the Count to her bedroom, where he proceeds to drink her blood. And then, of course, Lucy's beauty and purity distract Dracula from the call of the rooster, and at the first light of day, he collapses to the floor, dead. He does not turn to ash like in the 22 film, and there's a reason for that. Van Helsing arrives to discover Lucy dead and victorious, but then he can drive the stake through the heart of the Count to make sure that Lucy's sacrifice was not in vain. However, in a final ironic twist, Jonathan awakens from his sickness, now a vampire himself, and has Van Helsing arrested for the murder of Count Dracula. He then states enigmatically that he has much to do and is last seen riding away on horseback, garbed in the same fluttering black cloak as Dracula. It's interesting. North Free hates this film, obviously. This movie was schlock. So bad, it's good. Kinski was so corny. The atmosphere was bright and beautiful with wonderful theme music. It was like a Pride of Prejudice movie, not threatening. In a way, I know what you're saying. Okay. Kinski looks like Nosferatu without makeup. I don't know about that, but okay. Herzog saw the film as a parable about the fragility of order in a staid bourgeois town. It's more than a horror film. Nosferatu is not a monster, but an ambivalent, masterful force of change. When the plague threatens, people throw their property into the streets, they discard their bourgeois trappings, and a reevaluation of life and its meaning takes place. That's where Herzog was trying to do a different themology than what Murnau was doing. Murnau was trying to go with the horror and with the context that Orlok was, in fact, a monster. Isabelle Adjani says about her heroine role as Lucy Harker, there's a sexual element. She is gradually attracted towards Nosferatu, a fascination, as we all would, I think. First, she hopes to save the people of the town by sacrificing herself, but then in the act of being fed upon itself, there's a moment of transition. The scene where he isn't sucking her blood, sucking and sucking like an animal, and suddenly her face takes on a new expression, a sexual one, and she will not let him leave her. She basically takes a hold of him. There's a desire for him that had been born from that moment. A moment like this has never been seen before in a vampire picture. I don't know if I necessarily agree with her on the notion that we hadn't seen a sexual side of vampirism of this nature before this in film, but I do agree with it that it is one of the more nuanced scenes of such nature, and it probably did set a tone for greater emphasis on sexuality in vampire films moving forward. Does that make sense? Anybody care to comment on that?
Well, I think in the woman vampire films of the 60s and 70s based on Camilla, you see a lot of this sexuality. So I think she's incorrect in that.
Mm-hmm. That's what I was thinking.
I sort of agree with you. But she is much more beautiful to look at than the manly figure of Greta Schroeder in the original. So
yeah,
she can say whatever she likes.
Okay. North 3. Why on earth did they have Kinski look like a monster all the time? And Kinski was weak. Weak body, weak voice, and spastic moves. Oh, he loved it. Okay. He loved it for what it was. Okay. Okay, whatever. I don't know. I always looked at it as Kinski's Dracula was weak because not the persona was much weaker. Shrek was more stiff and menacing in certain ways, but it wasn't like the figure of Orlok was menacing. It was the nuance that was brought in the film that made him seem menacing. He looked just as thin and weak, if you know what I mean, as Kinski. But Kinski is not playing the role as a person who just feeds and treats humans like meals on legs, basically. He tries to play Dracula more sympathetically. He feels like the vampirism is not, it takes him away from his own free will. The Dracula character has no free will in this film. He doesn't get to choose, and he cannot cease to exist. Yes, he's an incarnation of evil, but Kinski wants to play him as a man who's suffering. This is him saying this. I'm quoting him basically.
This is one of those. This is in that early trend of modern horror films, mm-hmm. where you're not only supposed to be sympathetic to the monster, but he's actually, in a way, the anti-hero of the plot, and evil usually wins, as we see in this movie.
Right.
And it's it really got going with Night of the Living Dead, mm-hmm. and it has been in ascendancy ever since. It's very rare now that good triumphs over evil in a horror film, almost to the point that it's gotten just too repetitive. So
yeah, I would say that that's true. But yeah, they're trying to make it a little more duality to the film in this. And like you say, that's a good observation that they're trying to make the villain more of an anti-hero than stuff. I don't know about evil winning, but yeah, I guess that makes sense too.
And I think this role of must have been important to Klaus Kinski, because if you read about Kinski, like, one of the things you'll learn very quickly is he was apparently notorious for having temper tantrums. Like he worked with Werner Herzog, I think, like 5 times, and even Herzog said, the rats in this movie were far better behaved than Kinski was. And
we'll talk about the rats in a minute.
And yet, like I read, it took about, I think, 4 hours to apply the makeup, and Kinski, like, he said he understood that even though he hated being excessively made up, he understood that it was important for the role he was playing, and he actually got along very well with the makeup artist and offered no trouble whatsoever getting makeup done.
Okay, North Free asks, why does Orlok just have a stroke from the sunlight? Why does he need to be staked too? The reason he needed to be staked in the film was so that Harker could accuse Van Helsing of killing him, so he could put Van Helsing in prison for murder and proceed to go forth as a vampire and do whatever evil he's going to do after the movie's over. That's basically why that was done. But you mentioned the rats, John. This film is one of the most notorious films for animal cruelty in all of film history. Apart from traveling conditions that were so poor for the rats, which were imported from Hungary, they had started to eat each other upon arrival in the Netherlands, where the film was shot. Herzog insisted that these plain white rats be dyed gray. To do so, according to sources that were there as consultants and how to treat animals and everything at the film, the cages containing the rats needed to be submerged in boiling water for several seconds before you could put the dye on them. And this caused over half of the rats to be killed. The surviving rats then proceeded, after they got the dye on them, to lick themselves clean of the dye, which is exactly what their animal specialist said would happen. And of course, they all died from dye poisoning. So there was that problem. On top of that, there was mistreatment of the horses, the sheep, even the kittens in the very beginning that were playing with the locket with Lucy's picture inside were malnourished. So Herzog was directly fined and reported $150,000 in 1979. That's a pretty hefty sum penalty for ordering the dying of the rats and the subsequent consequences. However, this also damaged his reputation, but because the film was such a success in Europe, over 8 million tickets were sold in Europe alone. It pretty much saved his reputation from any further damage. But he was pretty much not liked as a director after this film for that reason.
I did not know any of this. This is all news to me, and affects my respect for the film, which was not high, to be honest, but it's now even less. And it's people like him that have ruined mankind's reputation with regard to their animal brothers and sisters. It's just horrible, and I hope he's suffering in hell for it.
I like the story better here in terms of that he did make the corrections to explain some of the plot holes that were in the 22 film. But like you, I I have to take it down a notch because of some of the stuff that was going on in the process of the filmmaking. I also, I don't know. I thought the end of the movie with Harker being a vampire, while being it's an interesting choice, I don't know if I agree with it. It just kind of makes Lucy's sacrifice in vain, because yes, she killed Dracula, but now her beloved husband must suffer the eternal damnation as a vampire.
Right.
I thought it would have made more sense and more poetic than if her sacrifice ending Dracula would have cured Jonathan of the affliction, because in some vampire mythology, if you kill the master vampire, all the ones he turned are cured of the affliction and become human again. But I didn't, I don't know if it's a wrong decision. I don't know. It's kind of a weird turn of events at the ending.
Can I throw something in here?
Sure.
This is the first time I'd ever seen this movie, and
Okay.
Me too.
I actually found it much more difficult to watch than the silent one, because it was so slow. Some of the photography is magnificent, but it's so slow, and some of the scenes with all the rats in the food and everything just made me want to vomit some bile up my throat. It just was an ugly movie, and so even though it was beautiful, it was in some ways ugly, and all the more so now that I know about what you just said.
Yeah.
But I struggled to get through this movie,
you know what? I'm reading my notes on this, and I want to go back to the 22 film. I thought I said 3 for the. I know I put 3. I meant 4 for 22. 4 stars for 22, and 3 stars for this one. That's what I meant to put down, just to be clarified on that.
Yeah, I agree, and I'm sure the fact that I had to watch this film later in the evening than I would have liked on Thursday, because I had other stuff to do. So, because I watched it on the day I got back from my Crown appointment in Charleston. So the fact that I watched it later in the evening than I would have liked may have had something to do with it. But I agree, it was very nicely photographed, but yeah, I did think it was slower. And like ultimately, like, whereas, Count Orlok has been living in my head since Tuesday, like I literally stopped thinking about Nosferatu the Vampire like the second it was over.
Okay. So you'd probably give it like a 2.
Yeah, I would.
Okay. And how about you?
I would have given it a 3. Now, with information you provided about the animal situation, I would knock it down to a 2.
Okay.
And,
so let's split the difference and give it a 2.5. And let's say, since I said 4, you said 5, and we'll just give it a 4.5 for the 22 film.
Yep.
I think that's fair. North Free said, okay, 4 stars, 22. Yeah, I was wondering how you rated it less than more of the Gargantuan ones before. Well, the thing is, North, there's different standards for different genre and different types of movies too. If I put this up against Lugosi, I still think Lugosi's is the best. I don't know. How about you guys?
I don't know if it's better, but I'd say it's up there.
Okay. It's, I'm not knocking Shrek. The plot holes in that, the way it's shot just bugged me for some reason. I can't, being a writer, I think affects me that way. I have a hard time when the stories are not quite there. Whereas the story with Gargantuans, while it was silly, and it was, I knew it was silly coming in. You know, it wasn't like they were going from source material that was at least moderately respected, I guess you could say. I don't know, but yeah. North says 2 stars, so yeah, you know, it is what it is. I actually, you know, like you say, I think Isabelle Adjani is really the shining aspect of the film, as we see. Kinski is actually, you know, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I understand what he's doing, and I do think he does play the character with a little more sympathy than Shrek, but they're 2 different interpretations of the character. He's trying to play the character to a point of sympathy, whereas Shrek did nothing of the sort. You know, so I think that makes a big difference.
Yeah, so, Shrek played his role more as a predator. And did so magnificently, you know.
Yeah.
In my opinion.
Yeah. So, you know, but it is, you know, quite an interesting dichotomy of the 2 films, and enjoyable to watch them both for what they were. But
it is worth noting a little random trivia fact: Klaus Kinski is the father of Nastasia Kinski, who, among other things, was in the 1982 Cat People, which we have talked about on this show before.
Mm-hmm.
So just a little useless trivia for you there.
Not about useless, but yeah, that's a good point. Lugosi's movie is better, I think, because of Lugosi. Yeah, he had a charisma that changed vampires forever. Handsome monsters. Charisma, yes. Handsome. Is Lugosi really that handsome?
I think he's got that suave, debonair look to him. I think most women would find him attractive. Most women at the time seemed to. I mean, It was advertised, if you remember, not as a horror film, but as a romance. So
yeah, that's true. It was played off as a dark romance. That's true. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. What did they know back in the 30s? No, I don't know. It's just interesting for that, for the era of things. And of course, I think part of the reason he comes across so that he has that kind of strongness, our presence, is because of the Brides of Dracula, because that's in there. He has.
Yeah.
And I think that makes it, whether you think those women who played the brides are attractive or not, it just implies that women want him.
Yes.
So,
I can see your point there. Yeah.
Where the Nosferatu films don't have that, so I think that's a good point as well. So, anyway, Northford says great stream. Raven, MonsterFan, John. Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
Next week, we're many of you have, not many of you, but I should say many people who have talked to me online have asked me why I haven't reviewed Werewolf by Night by Marvel Studios, and that's because I don't have Disney Plus. None of us do, so it's not an option for us to talk about that. But in the Werewolf by Night show, they featured Man-Thing. Well, years ago, before Marvel Studios was a thing, Sci-Fi did a Man-Thing movie, and that's what we're going to talk about next week. So that will be our film. It'll be another Tubi release, but that's what we'll be back with next week at 8 p.m. As we round. What's what I'm trying to think of? Round up October. Finish up the month. And I don't know this weekend if I will. I'm going to try to get a weekend show on and do some reviews, but I don't know yet because it's been kind of a crazy week. But But as always, I want to thank you. Pop Culture says, have a good night, everyone. Great job. Thank you. Whoops. There we go. What are you guys doing this weekend?
Can I just say that I saw a clip online of the Werewolf by Night with Man-Thing in it.
Mm-hmm.
He does look cool.
Yeah.
In terms of look, he gets an A+.
Yes. The whole film, what cuts I've seen of it, it looks very well done. So I'm pretty happy with what I saw.
I jumped out of my chair when I saw it because I didn't know he was, because I don't do Disney, but when I saw it, I said, "Hey, that's Man-Thing."
Yep. Yep. And so it's cool. So anyway, that's all for tonight. Whoops, wrong thing there. This silly thing doesn't want to do what it wants to do, as usual. But if you enjoyed this video, or you think others might, hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons to continue to get content from my channel. As always, both I and my guests thank you for your support. If you want to contact me on social media, Facebook, Lewis.BrightRaven, at Twitter at LewisBrightRave2. You can find more of my artwork at deviantart.com/BrightRaven. You've been watching Quoth the Raven, Lewis Bright Raven exclusively on YouTube. You can contact me for questions, suggestions of content for future episodes. Quoth the Raven, LBR72 at gmail.com. If I don't get back to you, try Lewis Bright Raven at yahoo.com. If you want to talk to John about music, it's Grey, Grey, Figaro, Figaro at hotmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
And do you have a contact information you want to share, Monster?
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. That's good. Mm-hmm. Okay, then, folks. As always, we want to thank you for watching, and we'll catch you guys either later this weekend or Monday when I get some more reviews done. So until then, have a great night and a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.